not in Kansas anymore.
Welcome to Mo Banshee's Lair, Visionary Talk Radio on GCR Progressive Internet Radio. We're rocking your world.
Welcome to Mo Banshee's Lair on GCR Internet Radio. We're rocking your world. Tonight we have a really cool guest, Kathy Benjamin. She's written a book, Funerals to Die For, which is just hilarious. But we have some important stuff to talk about first, and that is what's gone on in Oklahoma. I played this song, Bridge Over Troubled Water, tonight in memory of the lives lost in Oklahoma during the recent tornadoes. You know, we don't know why these things happen. I mean, it's nature and all, and it's very hard to take this kind of destruction and get your heads around it and all. But faith in God can do wonders, and I am just over the moon, as sick as it sounds, that the death toll has dropped dramatically. At the beginning of this, they were talking about possibly hundreds of people, mostly children, and now it's dropped dramatically. But the important thing is there are ways to help, okay? All the major news channels, MSN, CNN, what's the other one? Fox News. They all have links, and there's this code that you put into your cell phone. If you text 90999, you can donate $10 by your text phone to the Oklahoma Disaster Relief Fund. If you go on the Salvation Army's page, they already have banners up asking people to donate. The American Red Cross has stuff up for you to donate, and the Oklahoma Humane Society is already scrambling to try to collect animals who are displaced, and that's www.ochumane.org. And you have to understand, even if they can find the owners for these animals, the problem is the owners have no place to go right now. So the animals are going to need to be fostered. They're going to need temporary homes until the owners can get themselves into a permanent situation where they can come and get their animals and reclaim them. This is a huge monumental task, but we are Americans and we can do this. So please, if instead of going to McDonald's or Wendy's or one of those crap holes this week, instead do a $10 donation to one of the groups helping these victims. I know when we got hit by the hurricane last year, and we still haven't recovered. There are still areas of Lawrence Harbor and Manalocan and all the shore where the houses are just gone. Families have not been allowed back in yet. This is so upsetting to children. This puts such a strain on families, so consider making a $10 donation to help. You know, that'll be your good cause for the month. So I'm hoping that a lot of you hear this and a lot of people will do this. Again, it's the Salvation Army. I've got to tell you, they are wonderful, wonderful people. And the Red Cross and the Oklahoma Humane Society, oklahomahumane.org. Just what you can, $5-10, whatever, something will help. A lot of places are doing drives. These people don't need ripped up rugs or straw hats. They need deodorant, they need underpants, they need essentials, and all these sites have lists of what these people are going to need in the long and short term. So please check those lists and consider dropping those off. And be careful of scam artists. This kind of thing always brings out scam artists. They say they're collecting for these victims, and it turns out they're not. So be careful. Make sure you double check. I always say go right to the Salvation Army site, go right to the Red Cross site, or go right to the Oklahoma Humane Society site, oklahomahumane.org. And please, I know God will shine on you. Our prayers go out to the people of Oklahoma. This is like the fourth time this town has been leveled. They live in Tornado Alley, and this is one of the big problems with that area. Housing is cheaper, so families think, well, we can make a start there, but there's always a catch. I live by the water, and some of the bungalows by the water, yeah, they are cheaper, but then every 30 or 40 years you get a hurricane that takes out the bungalow. So you see, wherever you're living, you have to be mindful of Mother Nature and what she can do. So God bless everybody in Oklahoma. Everybody do me a favor and make sure you, if you can help, you do. Our guest is waiting on the side, and as I said, I played Bridge Over Troubled Water tonight for the people of Oklahoma. Kathy Benjamin, welcome to the lair.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Thank you. Normally I do a lot of crazy news, but tonight I think we just need to laugh a little bit. So You've got a book. This book is hilarious. Some of the stuff, I don't even know how you got it.
There's definitely some weird stuff, but it's all interesting and fun, so.
How did you start? How did you get the idea?
Well, actually, it was an idea that was brought to me by my publisher, Adams Media. They'd come up with the idea themselves, and they were looking for an author. But when they gave me the idea, I just thought it was perfect for me because death and dying was something that has just freaked me out so bad. I think it freaks most people out my whole life. And so I decided kind of when I got to college that in order to try and get over my fear, I was going to learn as much as I could kind of from a historical standpoint about like death and funerals. And so I started taking some classes in it about like funerals in the 1800s and death in the 1500s and things like that. So I had a background in it already, and when I was approached with this idea, I said, you know what, this is perfect for me. It's going to be really interesting. So, yeah. You are a writer, right? You are a journalist or something, yeah? Explain what you usually focus on. I'm definitely not a journalist, but I am a writer online, and I write for sites like crack.com and mentalfloss.com, and if any of your listeners are familiar with them or not familiar with them, they're websites that run like fact-based articles, but they're also humorous, and they kind of want to introduce people to new facts or have them look at things in a way that they've never thought about them before. So that's been my career for about 4 years now, kind of just presenting, on a weekly basis, interesting new factual things to readers online. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I read it about you on Huffington Post, which is an AOL typey thing, right? Yeah, I was on there a couple weeks ago talking about the book, yes. Yeah, and that's when I caught hold of this book, and as I've explained to you, we've had shows about, post-mortem photography, which took off after the war, the Civil War, and as photos became, photographers would go through the country and take pictures of little Johnny and Judy dead, so that Mommy and Daddy had a picture to remember them by, and that was actually not considered macabre at all, right?
No, well, I mean, the Victorians, both in England and America, were definitely obsessed with death to a point that, I mean, probably the only time in history that people have been that obsessed with death. And so they had all these kind of macabre ideas, but yeah, according to society at the time, it was perfectly fine. And when it came to things like postmortem photography, to be photographed at that time required a lot of time and a lot of money. I mean, the equivalent of a couple $1,000s today just to have one photo. And you had to sit for long periods of time, long periods being, you know, anywhere up to 15, 20 minutes, depending on the type of exposure they were doing. And so you wouldn't necessarily think it was worth it to spend that much time and money to get a photo of your family until a major person in that family died, and then all of a sudden you might be like, oh my gosh, I wish we had this permanent image of them. And so it became perfectly acceptable. For many people, it would be the only photograph ever taken of them would be when they were dead. And because you had to sit for so long, dead people were actually very, very good at being photographed, because the alive people in the photograph would keep moving, just, you know, shift a little bit. It's almost impossible it's almost impossible to sit still, completely still for 15 minutes. But if you're dead, you're not going to move. So they would end up being, you know, the person in the photo that wasn't all blurry. So it was, it ended up being a really popular way of people to remember their loved ones. And they would display these photos, and they would, you know, have them in lockets around their neck. Again, it's the only photo you have of a loved one. You know, everyone else was doing it. Mm-hmm. It didn't seem weird to have a dead person in a necklace or anything like that.
Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, Harold, your brother can lay still. Why can't you just stand there?
Exactly.
I mean, I look at some of those old pictures where they have, like, twins holding the hands of the other child, and I'm thinking, well, now we know where Jack the Ripper came from, for crying out loud, you know?
Yeah.
But death was different back then. And I've had Al Savaline in, and I was just with him over the weekend doing a fundraiser, which went really, really well. But he said, we've made death so clinical now that it's almost like the family is completely relieved of everything but just saying, gee, I miss them. And it seems like nowadays they're starting to take that back. They're taking back the this is my family member and I'm going to do what I want to do with them. Do you know what I mean?
I do, and I think the clinicalness of it definitely, at least in Western society, ties back to when we started embalming people, which happened during and after the Civil War, when embalming became big. Because then, I mean, what you're doing with embalming is trying to convince yourself that nothing changes after death. You know, that people look exactly the same, and you have an open coffin, and it's been a week, and you know they look almost alive, and that, you know, there's no purpose to that other than to convince yourself. And I think since then, we've definitely tried to make it really clinical and really prescribed. And I think people may think that, you know, their religion has always had a certain way of burying people, but most religions have, you know, it's evolved over time. And the sort of ways that we bury people, maybe not now, but, you know, 10, 15 years ago, is definitely a product of the time. And, yeah, we can definitely bring that back. You can say, you know, if you want to write out a will and say, I want to be buried in a way that's environmentally acceptable, or I want people to have fun at my funeral, or things like that. I hope that people are starting to kind of think about death in a way that's a little more fun and a little less clinical, definitely.
Yeah, in the chat there, Lady A is talking about green funerals, and Stanley is talking about him wanting a Viking funeral. Well, my father, he knew he was going to die, and he had been given 5 years, and he was in a very somber mood one day, and he said at the table, he says, when I die, he says, Margaret, I want you buried with me when you die. He says, and my husband, he was a bit of a cut up, and he says, oh, Bud, don't worry about that. He says, we're going to put you on a boat, put it out in the middle of the bay, torch it, give you a Viking funeral. And the old man got up and walked away. And I kicked him under the table. I says, he's serious.
Yeah.
And he says, I didn't know that. Who the hell would talk about something like that at the table? I says, somebody who's dying?
Yeah,
but,
exactly.
Yeah, it's, we went from very ceremonial stuff to now it's almost clinical. Your first chapter is called The Hilarious History of Inhumation.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the first burials, not so final resting places, City of the Dead, catacombs, the Terracotta Army.
Yeah.
Drinks Are on the Dead Guy. Drinks Are on the Dead Guy reminds me of Barrymore, the great actor Barrymore, John Barrymore. And there's a story that when he died, some of his friends went in and borrowed his body and took it and sat it up at the table in Flynn's house, and when drunken Flynn came home and went into the dining room, there was Barrymore sitting at the table, and it almost killed him. So maybe that was the excuse for the bad heart for him. But as years went by, they said, no, that never really happened. We guarded his body all night, because people were like, oh my God, how horrible. But you're talking about the first burials, which were necessity, right?
Yeah, I think at least this is actually a really hard part for me to research, just because it's such a, I guess a controversial thing with anthropologists and everything, like how we really became human almost at the same time that we decided to bury our dead. Because if you're living in a small, community and just like huts and things like 100,000 years ago, 300,000 years ago, you're not concerned about burial. There's no religion, there's no connection to a dead body. You don't feel that there's a spirit or a soul in there, at least as far as we know. And so it's just kind of, people died where they stood sort of thing, and that was it. You just got them away, and you didn't even know about disease or anything like that. So, but then as soon as we start burying people, ritually burying people, it happens to tie in about the same time where we start having language and where we start having religion. And so all three of those things combined to make an idea and that spread throughout humanity to say, like, when someone dies, you need to bury a hole in the ground and you need to put them in it. And then maybe if they had something maybe they were really good hunters, so you put their spear in with them, and suddenly it becomes, a connection to the next world and everything. There's a reason that this body needs to be buried, and there's a reason that they need to have something in the grave with them and a place where you can mourn. And so, yeah, I think it's definitely one of the times that you can pinpoint and say that's where we became human, that's where we became people, where we separated ourselves from the animals. Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, the game changer. Yeah. And you look at those children that are found in like the mountains down in South America. They're finding them now, the mummified children and stuff that were buried. It went from Jesus, Uncle Lou there stinks. We got to do something with that. So, he's like melting into a pile of yuck, and the dogs are dragging him away now. So, you could see that, but then it starts to take on that whole ceremonial thing where they decide they're going to even kill people and decorate them after death and pose them as tribute to gods, and some of those children are adorned absolutely beautifully. Their hair is perfect, and it's kind of dissettling to see them. Not so final resting places. What is that?
Not so final resting places had to do with basically, it's basically a lie that we tell ourselves, that we've told ourselves throughout history, that we know that when we die, we're going to go into the ground and that's going to be it. But that's not it. I mean, we know that's not it. We know that Egyptian tombs, virtually every Egyptian tomb was robbed at some point. And it's not just Egyptians. It's in the Middle Ages in Europe, they started running out of room, so they would dig up bodies so they could put more bodies in the ground in these small churchyards. And so it's just, I went into a specific discussion about a time in Salt Lake City, Utah in the 1800s when the Mormons had arrived and there was a man who had ended up digging up for seemingly almost no reason, just dozens of bodies and stolen their clothes and held the clothes in their house. But it was, it's just basically the idea that there's always someone looking for something. There's been times when, they've dug up bodies to give to scientists because dissection was illegal and people would pay for a dead body to dissect. So really it's, a lot of people in history have gone into the ground and thought that might be the end, but it's not. It's not the final resting place, definitely.
Actually, the St. Maura in Philadelphia, friends of mine are trying to clean up the cemetery, and somebody found a bunch of Civil War graves have been recently unearthed, and what they're doing is they're taking the medals and stuff off of these guys. And obviously they're selling them as historical, look, it's a real Civil War, medal and that kind of thing. So you're right.
Yeah.
Graves have always been a picking place for thieves. And, a lot, and even Bob Ballard, who found the Titanic, he was very concerned about the Titanic becoming picked clean by scavengers, which the Titanic Society pretty much they did go in and take a lot off of it. But he said, there are bodies still there. Well, technically there aren't bodies still there, but you can see a pair of shoes the way they're laying. Obviously there was a body weighed down by something which is no longer there, and you have to ask yourself, are we disturbing a grave or not? So you're right. Grave robbing has been since the beginning. I can picture the first humans sitting there saying, damn, my axe broke. Well, we buried Saul with 2 axes. Want to go dig them up? And, necessity is the mother of invention. We're going to go to break, and we're going to play another song. And I wanted to try to keep it kind of light tonight because it is a very hard evening. So after Stan's intro, we're going to do Monty Python, Always Look at the Brighter Side of Life. And we'll be back. This is GCR Internet Radio, and we're talking about funerals to die for.
To Jurassic Park.
Well, hello there. This is Stan, inviting you to listen to Jurassic Park, where we dig up the old bones of rock and roll, 50s, 60s, 70s, and beyond, and then carefully rebury them. Thursday nights, 8 Eastern, on GCR.
And welcome back to Mo Banshee's Lair, Visionary Talk Radio on GCR. We are talking about bizarre, funeral rituals of the past and some of the new ones that are coming back. And I wanted to remind everybody, about 2 years ago, in 2010, I was telling everybody about this little old lady in, I don't even know how to say this name. It's something Pennsylvania, Wassaloosing, Pennsylvania. She's 91 years old. And she was having some work done or something. A local guy from the township had to come and look at her meter or something. And he walked into the garage, and he realized there was a man sitting there, and he's talking to him and realizes that the man is not responding. So he takes a closer look and sees that it's actually a corpse sitting there with dark glasses on. And then he goes into the kitchen to use the phone to call somebody, and there is a woman sitting in there at the kitchen table who's also dead. And it turns out that the 91-year-old widower had a twin sister, and when she died, she couldn't stand the thought of her being under the ground, so her husband helped her dig her sister up, and they put her in the house. And then when her husband died, she paid a couple of young men from the local town to help her. They dug up her husband, James, and they brought him to the house and set him up in his favorite place, his garage. And she got in a lot of trouble for it. Don't ask me what you could do to a 91-year-old woman. I have no clue. But she says, I'd like to go in and I'd talk and I'd forget that they were, there. And she says, I put glasses on her. And when I put the glasses on, it made all the difference in the world. I would fix my sister up. I'd fix her face all the time. And she had the same story for her husband, who was propped on a couch in the garage. And the township of Bradford County said they would let her have the bodies back if she put them in an above ground tomb, which is it's hard for some people to let go of their loved ones, isn't it?
Definitely. At least, from my research, there's been some just absolutely crazy things that people do, just to not be away from the physical remains of someone they love. In the 1930s, there was a doctor called Carl Tanzler, and he lived in America, and he fell in love with one of his patients who had tuberculosis, and she was only about 21 when she died, but he had fallen in love with her, and so he robbed her mausoleum, basically, and took her body and tried to keep it looking as decent as possible, and kept it in his bed. He put glass eyes in it and kind of plaster over her skin. I'm not sure if she was embalmed, but from the description, it definitely sounds like she wasn't. She ends up, there are photos online. I don't really recommend looking at them, but she ends up looking like just a plaster mannequin. And eventually the police found her, decades later in his bed, in his house. And he'd just been sleeping next to her for decades, this tuberculosis patient of his that he'd totally fallen in love with. So, yeah, obviously he's probably a bit touched in the head, but, people really will go to extreme lengths, yeah.
I'm very aware of this story, and he actually was trying to revive her at a point, and said that he actually had been able to rouse her to a conscious state. Don't ask me what he was on, but yes, and when they reburied her, they would not tell him where. Nobody knows actually where she's buried, because they were afraid he would try to get her again. Her name was Maria Elena Magro de Hoyas, and she worked at the same hospital with him, and he was a quack, and when he couldn't save her, he actually went and stole her body, and the family had no clue this was going on until somehow he got ratted out. So yeah, there are extremes, but even in the ritual of burial, like you say, with embalming and all, we try to deck them out in this losing hope that they will always look like that. When we close the box, they're still going to look like that when we're done. If we go 20 years later and open it, they'll still look the same, and of course that's not reality. But it's big money right now too, though, isn't it?
Definitely. There's a lot of ways that you can kind of try and convince yourself that a person is still with you and that they look the same and things like that. And it's just amazing. We've done things in the past, everything from death masks that people could come and look at so they could see that when someone dies, this is what they look like. These days, you can be made into diamonds. It's just amazing the things people will pay for, basically, just to always feel like they have a little bit of the deceased person with them.
A lot of parents will take a locket of hair to hold on to the child, you know. Photography is coming back, and I've spoken about this before on my show. When my neighbor's mother passed away, her father asked her to please take photographs of her mother in the coffin, you know, for him. And she was like, I don't believe I'm doing this. You know, he wants pictures of her to remember her because it had been a very long and rough funeral and they hadn't seen her look quite that good. It's odd to think of somebody actually looking good at their funeral, isn't it?
It is. I remember there was a big deal when Whitney Houston died, that someone at the funeral took photos of her in her coffin, her open coffin, and I believe it was the National Enquirer who put that on their cover because apparently we all needed to, I don't know, see that she was dead or see that she still looked nice when she was dead or something like that, but someone got a big payday out of that. So I think there's definitely, I think it's more than a morbid curiosity at this point. It's definitely something that people are willing to go to great lengths to just kind of ensure that they feel that way, that they get that kind of closure. Yeah.
Yeah, do you think Michael Jackson, what's his name, Elvis Presley, do you think it's just that some fans just can't accept that they're dead and they need proof?
Yeah, I mean, well, definitely. I mean, there's always been the conspiracy theories about, you know, the Tupac and Notorious B.I.G. and, I mean, I think even Marilyn Monroe to an extent. So there's definitely, I think that's probably part of it. With Michael Jackson, you know, obviously he had such a gigantic funeral. I would hope there's no question there that, you know, that he has passed. But I do write about him in my book a little bit about his coffin, which if you watched his funeral, which, you know, statistics say you probably did, cost something, you know, like $30,000, possibly more if he got extras. And there are little things in it like, you know, the neck rest can be adjusted and everything, and it seems really odd to me, at least, that, you know, why would a corpse need its neck rest adjusted? You know, why would the pillow have to be in a certain place? It's really for us looking at it, but, you know, people will pay thousands of dollars extra just to you know, convince themselves that, you know, his corpse is comfortable, if you will. You know what I mean? So. Yeah, it's at the end of the day, it's all for the people living, but we kind of pretend like it's for the body, basically.
For them, yeah. Yeah, I actually didn't watch his funeral. I didn't watch Elvis or Whitney's or... I did see Kevin Costner when they replayed it on the news when he was talking to... the mother, Sissy, but that's about it. I don't watch that stuff. You have one here that's, I'm looking, Death is a Hairy Situation.
Yes. That one was definitely interesting. Yeah, it's a woman who was only buried in August of 2012, so really, really recently. Her name was Julia Pastrana, and she had actually died 152 years before that at the age of 26. It was actually a really tragic death, probably brought on by childbirth. She had just given birth. And she was born with... I don't know if you call it a disorder or whatever, but she was covered in hair, just absolutely covered in hair, not just hirsute, just almost ape-like in appearance, just thick hair all over her body. And she was born in Mexico, and this is, of course, in the 1800s, so, you know, people weren't as forgiving, and there were freak shows back then. And she was discovered and basically sold as a freak, if you will,
a freak.
To this. Yeah, I mean, to use their terminology, a sideshow to this man who actually probably did fall in love with her. He did marry her. He bought her the best clothes. She wore corsets. She wore gloves. But he displayed her as someone that people would pay money to come look at, and at the time, quite a lot of money to come look at. And But her manager slash owner slash husband did get her pregnant, and the birth ended up killing her and the young child, who also was covered with hair. And he realized when they died, if he preserved them, he could still display them, which unfortunately he did. And so he continued to just go around the world with his deceased wife and his deceased son, and they were kind of just, embalming wasn't really around yet, but they were preserved, and he made a lot of money off them, even what they looked like when they were dead. But he may have had a thing for hairy women, because he ended up marrying another bearded lady after he was a widower. So he may have had a thing for people like that. But yeah, he was finally buried. Yeah.
You're reminding me of a story, and Rosalina or Rosalia Lombardo. She was born in 1918. She was a child who died of influenza, and her father asked Alfredo Salafina to preserve her body. And to this day, she's in the Capuchin catacombs in Sicily, and there's a little discoloring, but they now have her in a a humidified box, but you can still see her. This kid looks perfect. Like, all she needs to do is open her eyes, and it's to great extents. But this isn't one of those cases where he had her embalmed to display. It was because he just couldn't dare see her leave or change or anything. I mean, he's dust in the wind now, but his daughter is still there. Do you think people thought that embalming a body could keep them forever?
I think to an extent I actually write about the Capuchin catacombs of Palermo in my book a little bit, and I think part of it does come down to just, again, morbid curiosity. And I think if we're really serious, we've always kind of liked to look at dead bodies, and what happened with the Capuchin catacombs is something in them. It was when the monks ran out of room in their monastery graveyard, they dug some catacombs and they started putting bodies in there, and they found that they were being preserved naturally. There's something about the air and the soil and everything that leads to bodily preservation down there. And eventually rich people started paying to have family members like the one you were talking about put down there, and tourists and family members would pay to come and see the bodies, even if they didn't know who any of the people were. They would pay and come and look. And I think there's definitely something in people that wants to kind of look death in the face. And the more that it looks the way we look, the less scary it is. So when you have something like a catacomb that's naturally preserving bodies, you're going to get people interested because they want to go and say, look, it's okay. This is going to be me one day, but I'm not going to look any different. And, yeah, I think that's probably part of the reason people are kind of so fascinated with making dead bodies stay as realistic as possible.
We want everybody to buy the book, so tell them where they can find this book.
Okay, it's called Funerals to Die For. It's by me, Kathy Benjamin, published by Adams Media, and you can find it online pretty much anywhere that sells books, including Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and you should be able to find it in any good bookstore, particularly Barnes & Noble, around you.
Chapter 2, Death Around the World. Now, that's where it gets interesting.
Yeah.
I'm too sexy for this coffin.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, hold on one second. I'm trying to get there. Death Around the World.
It's chapter 2,
Here we go.
page 7, page 68.
Yeah, this is one of those things where it's if you have a good sense of humor, or if your next of kin has a good sense of humor, sometimes you don't want funerals to be completely kind of morbid and maudlin and everything. So one of the things that people apparently do is play or sing kind of really maybe slightly inappropriate songs at their funeral just to get people kind of laughing or whatever. And there was a Australian funeral home that released a list of their most popular weird songs, and that included things like Stairway to Heaven, which, is pretty appropriate. Another one by Dust by Queen, Ding Dong, the Witch is Dead from The Wizard of Oz, which is definitely...
man!
Yeah, there was just a controversy with Margaret Thatcher dying in the United Kingdom because people who were happy that she had died were buying the single Ding Dong, the Witch is Dead, and they wanted to get it played as one of the top 40, the week that she died. But apparently, at least in Australia, people are choosing to have that played, or at least their relatives are, at their funeral. So... I'm Too Sexy by Right Said Fred. There's no end to the entertainment you can bring people at your funeral, apparently.
That's where I got The Other Side of Life by Monty Python. People have that played at their funerals. And as I was telling Kathy before we started, I had a friend who died who was a Medal of Honor winner from World War II. And I'm sitting there, and all of a sudden his daughter-in-law starts singing, this was Dick's favorite song, and she starts singing Somewhere Over the Rainbow. And it was one of those moments when we were all looking around like, this was Dick's favorite song? But it was really funny because she was singing it, and the family was, they were rocking and holding hands while she was singing it. And I was kind of like trying not to laugh because I know the guy. I mean, I'm not so sure that would have been his favorite song at his funeral. But, Bridge Over, there are songs that are very... They draw out meanings on it, and then there's others like Ding Dong, the Witch is Dead, that's really like, wow, what a slap in the face.
Yeah. Yeah, unless you came up with it yourself. But one of the things I discovered when I was researching, and I thought this was really interesting, is that legally there is almost no place in the world where your relatives have to do what you want at your funeral. So if you write in your will, I want you to play this nice hymn, and they decide they don't like you and they want to play Ding Dong, the Witch is Dead, that legally, unless it says you have to play the song or you don't get any of my money, there's really nothing you can do once you're dead. People can throw any sort of funeral they want for you. So it's probably good to be nice to your relatives.
Do you have a section in there about all the unique coffins now that people can have for their funerals?
Yes, I'm sure it's spread at this point, but it started in the African country of Ghana, and it supposedly started with one man who he made just kind of interesting furniture, and at one point he was instructed to build this chair that was really a cocoa bean because a politician who'd made his money that way was going to be in a procession. He wanted to sit on a chair that looked like a cocoa bean. But the politician died and before the procession, and so they had this coffin-shaped bean, and they said, well, we'll just put him in that. And so he was buried in that. And that had this coffin maker, it's fun. But this coffin maker, then his grandmother died, and he was like, she had always apparently wanted to travel, and she'd never gotten to. So he decided she was going to be able to travel in the afterlife. So he made a coffin that was shaped like an airplane and buried her in that. And after those two, the information started spreading that he was doing this, and just dozens of people, hundreds of people came to him and said, for my coffin or my relative's coffin, I want something that looks like a shoe because they made shoes, or a cell phone because they were always on their cell phone, and things like that. And now it was I believe it's the 1980s, these things were displayed as art in museums around the world, and so now people from around the world call not just this man, who I believe is still alive, but his apprentices, and say, I want a coffin that looks like whatever, it can be literally anything, a tube of lipstick, or, just really anything, and people do it, and they're quite pricey, but, they're all handmade, and it just kind of adds a bit of fun to your funeral, really.
I saw a picture of Gene Simmons next to a Kiss coffin.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
It was all decorated for Kiss.
With Kiss. Yeah. Yeah, and she's already talking about that sort of thing. Yeah.
beer cans, any beer that you drink, there's a coffin for it. Any football game group, any baseball group, Coke, Sprite, I've seen them for that. And then it gets mundane, like if you're British, you can have a British coffin or an Irish coffin or an American, and then if you're a fireman, you can, some of them are really, really weird. I think one of the weirdest ones that I saw was the ballet slipper coffin.
Yeah. Well, if they were a ballerina, or they really liked ballet or whatever, it'll make sense to them, I guess. But yeah, definitely, it's one of those things that's definitely spread. I know, like you said, you can get your favorite sports team on like what looks like a normal coffin, and then you can kind of get just applique on it, and it'll be about your sports team. But yeah, apparently this town in Ghana has just become like a huge tourist attraction because people want to come and see these. They're called fantasy coffins because, people just like the idea of their funeral being a little bit different these days, a little bit more fun.
Yeah, it reminds me during the Victorian days, if you go up to Sleepy Hollow Cemetery and you see the different mausoleums that everybody has, they're trying to outdo one another, and then you see Guggenheim, who was a philanthropist, and all he's got is a Celtic cross. It kind of, makes me laugh because the rest of these people, they were millionaires and they're trying to outdo each other, and this guy was a philanthropist who felt if you died with more money than you started with, then you're doing something wrong because you're not helping people. And when you go up there, he just has a very simple Celtic cross that says Guggenheim on it. Going along with this, the new trend in Puerto Rico and Mexico, where they're posing the bodies, and even America, they're posing bodies in recliner chairs on motorcycles, standing them up in corners. Did you write about that?
Yeah, I'm actually not sure if that ended up in the book. It may have a little bit, but yeah, I definitely saw photos. I couldn't find so much information like about why this was happening, but there are definitely photos online. The one that on the motorcycle that you were talking about definitely sticks in my mind. A young African American youth.
Something sticks someplace.
Yeah, and he's on a motorcycle in the funeral home, and just that is how he's posed. And it does, I know we were talking about this before we came on the air, that how do they pose them like that? I mean, rigor mortis only lasts so long, so how do you get someone to sit up on a motorcycle or stand in a corner? I could not find information. I think that's probably a secret that they're keeping at this point. But yeah, you can. If you think an open coffin isn't enough, you can apparently be posed and exactly on a recliner watching some TV. People can just come in and see you relaxing. Yeah, I'm not sure why, but it definitely is something people are doing these days.
Yeah, I mean, I told a joke before the show, and I got to ask myself, okay, what are they using? And I read about the kid that got shot in Puerto Rico, and they posed him in this corner. They used PVC piping, I don't know how they used it. I don't know how they got this guy to stand up, but he's standing. I mean, it's just, come on. All right. He's dead. Get over it, Yeah. But the one on the motorcycle and him standing there, and then I saw the man in the recliner with the Giants a blanket, and they had a TV going with Giants games going, and I'm thinking, you people are over the top. I mean, but I suppose in some odd way it helps them get through the whole process, right?
Oh, definitely. I mean, yeah, at the end of the day, it's just for the person. Like, I know, a classmate of mine had someone die on their motorcycle, and someone said, well, at least they went out, the way they would have wanted to, doing something they loved. And at first that seems kind of, morbid. It's like, well, how can you say that? But really, it's like, well, if that's what's going to help you, picturing them then on their motorcycle or doing the thing they love, if that's going to help you get over it, they're not complaining. If you have the money and you can find someone who's willing to do it for you, whatever helps you get past your grief and kind of make it a celebration of life rather than, wallowing in death sort of thing. It's really fine.
Well,
that's one thing I definitely learned writing this book is like, whatever works, as long as it's legal, just go ahead and do it. Whatever helps you get over it, it's fine.
I gotta tell you something. I would have to be dead, because if they got that kid on that bike the way I think they did, he better be dead. Anyway, we're gonna go to break, and we're gonna play my promo, and then the Doors. People Are Strange, because I think it's perfect for tonight, and we'll be right back with Kathy. Kathy Benjamin. We're going to come back and talk about some strange stuff going on in funeral world today. We think what went on in the past is strange. It's getting weird again all over.
There's no place like home. There's no place like home. There's no place like home. There's no place like home.
This is Mo inviting you to visit me at my lair. Mo Banshee's Lair Visionary Talk Radio airs every Tuesday night live on GCRInternetradio.com. Tune in at 9 p.m. Eastern Time Zone. Topics A to Z, Mo Banshee's Lair on GCR Internet Radio. We're rocking your world.
Just try to stay out of my way. Just try. I'll get you, my pretty, and your little dog, too.
Welcome back to Mo Banshee's Lair, and our special guest is Kathy Benjamin, and she's written a book, Funerals to Die For. And I got to tell you something. You got to get this book, and then when you get it and you read some of this stuff, you got to Google it and look at some of the pictures and stuff about this. There's body exposure, death is for the birds, you're standing on grandma. I don't know what that's about. The never ending funeral, the pre-death party. What is that?
It's something, it's from what I can tell, it's a really, really new phenomenon, kind of the past decade or so, and it just has to do with the fact that medicine has kind of gotten so much better that we can now tell someone you only have a certain amount of time to live. When we know someone's terminal, and they can usually be pretty accurate about it. And so what a lot of people are choosing to do in that situation is, instead of having a funeral after they've died and have it be like a tragic experience, they have what's called a living funeral. And the most famous living funeral that people might be familiar with was covered in the book Tuesdays with Maury, where a person who knows they're dying says, you know what, everyone come, I'm going to pay for food and drink, and we're going to kind of celebrate my life, and I'm still alive. So, you're celebrating it with me as opposed to after me, sort of things. And it is, I mean, I think that it's something really beautiful in a way, definitely. It's kind of one last big party. The timing is something I mentioned in my book. You kind of have to get right. I talk about a priest who had one, and he'd been told he only had a certain number of months to live, and 2 years later he was still alive, which it's still good that you had this celebration of your life, but, it is kind of like a little bit awkward. I'm still alive a couple years later. Definitely it's not something you do, if you're not sick. You only do it if it's, coming towards the end. You can't be like 30 and go, oh, let's just have a party celebrating me that isn't my birthday. No. So, but it's kind of a nice thing that people have started coming up with. In my book, I talk about one gentleman in Taiwan who even invited the doctors who would get his body after he died because he had a very strange illness, and it would be helpful if he was studied. And he knew that, and so he invited them to come celebrate his life as well. So I think it's a good way to bring closure for everyone, including the person who's terminal.
Yeah, can you picture it? Hey, how you feeling? Do you think it's tonight? You let us know. Really, it reminds me of an American wake over in Ireland. It was when they knew that somebody was going to come over to America, and times being what they were in the last century, there probably wasn't going to be any money to go back and forth, so they kind of wrote them off and figured this is the last time I'm going to see you, so they would have what amounted to a wake. It was a big party, but in a way it was a saying goodbye party. We know we're never going to see you again.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. It's a perfect analogy, I think. Yeah, definitely what it is.
So it sounds like maybe a carryover from that. I saw a picture of a guy in China who died, and they got him a stripper as a gift. He was dead in a coffin, and I saw a cowboy's cheerleader at some guy's funeral doing cheers. Stripper funerals, these are big now?
Well, they're not huge, I should say. They're definitely, they're technically illegal in both Taiwan and China, which is where they're biggest. Obviously, the government, isn't really thrilled about being known for having funerals with strippers. So it is something that is either illegal or very, very frowned upon. But people still do it, especially in rural areas. It also has a bit of a connection to the Chinese mob, so there's that, which also adds to the whole it's illegal sort of thing. But, there are people who just either really like strippers or they're next of kin when they're throwing the party. The funeral want it to be a party, and so they invite strippers, and there are these women who go around on buses, and they're like, not like how we would think of buses. They're almost like a parade float, really. And they come into town, they're hired, they come into town and they park their parade float and they start doing dances and stripping and everything. And sometimes they're asked not to actually completely undress, but they still dance and give lap dances and things like that. And there are a couple of theories that people give as to why this is a good thing. They say it distracts, ghosts, so that the deceased can go into the afterlife and they won't be picked on by anyone who's been dead longer and things like that, because they'll be looking at the naked ladies. But really, it's, just an excuse for a party, really. And apparently, in some really rural areas, you can have like 2 funerals in one night, and so it'll be kind of a competition to see which group of strippers can get more people to attend the funeral, because in Chinese and Taiwanese custom, it's very important to have a lot of people attend your funeral. And so if, random people show up because they're strippers, so much the better, because it means, you were more popular and better for you in death. So, yeah. But it's
good to know good strippers.
Moving over to China. Yeah. Yeah. But,
it's good to know good strippers.
Exactly.
Yeah. Really, who wants a crappy stripper? She better be top notch, right?
Yeah.
Chapter 3, and this book again is Funerals to Die For, and it's on Amazon and Borders and all the bookstores you can find them. Not so solemn superlatives. The most popular cemetery name.
Yes. Yeah, this was really interesting to me. You wouldn't think that there was a cemetery name that was, just used by everyone, but apparently in in the Wild West, if you will. They weren't very creative, and so they came up with the name Boot Hill for cemeteries, and it stuck, and it was just used in dozens of cemeteries across the Midwest during kind of the 1800s, during that kind of wild period. And supposedly the name comes from the fact called Boot Hill that a lot of men died with their boots on, meaning, you know, they weren't in bed, they weren't dying of old age, they were, you know, being gunned down or in an accident of some kind. And so one of the things I enjoyed was the fact that apparently a lot of people who were killed in like shootouts and things like that, they wouldn't want their families to know what they were involved in. And so in these cemeteries, there is an inordinate number of tombstones that say that people were struck by lightning, which statistically not that many people were struck by lightning, but that was just kind of the euphemism for, oh, they died in a bad way or whatever. But yeah, so they just had famous places, Deadwood, South Dakota, Tombstone, Arizona. They all had cemeteries called Boot Hill, and it just kind of stuck. It was a really popular name.
Do you remember the movie Tombstone with Kurt Russell, where he's Wyatt Earp and Val Kilmer plays Doc Holliday, and at the end he's in the sanitarium for people with tuberculosis, and he looks down and he's dying, and he sees he doesn't have his boots on, his feet are bare, and he looks down and he says, "Now that's funny." You know, all the fights and gunfights they had been in, and here he dies with not even socks on, you know. It's kind of funny. Yeah, Boot Hill. Who would have thought? The largest cemetery, where is that?
The largest, well, it depends on how you define largest. It's one of those things where is it the number of bodies, is it the area, is it whatever. So there's a couple contenders for this. There's a cemetery in Hamburg, Germany that has such a German name, I'm not even going to try and pronounce it, but it has 1.5 million bodies, but it is which is not huge by, you know, huge cemetery body count, but it's in 966 acres, which is the largest non-military cemetery in the world if you include just the acreage. And there are 25 bus stops. I mean, 25 bus stops in a cemetery for people to just drive around to get to the. Yeah, I mean, it's huge. It takes 230 gardeners to keep it looking pretty and everything. And because it's in Germany, there's a lot of memorials to World War II, the Jews and things like that, and a lot of people like that are buried there. The most famous person or controversial person buried there is a prostitute who was buried in 2011, and her grave had all these pictures of her in lingerie and things, and they had to ask to have it removed. But the largest military cemetery in the world, in terms of size, is in Long Island, and it is just, they bury about 7,000 people per year. It's, especially right now, it's pretty tragic actually. But when it comes to number of bodies, you just cannot beat Wadi al-Salam in Iraq. It's called the Valley of Peace, ironically, in Iraq, and people might have heard of it kind of in the last decade because a lot of firefights during the war in Iraq occurred there. But it has 5 million bodies. That's an estimated 5 million bodies buried in it since the 600s. And according to some reports that I read, virtually every Shia Muslim in Iraq requests to be buried there to this day. So it's just the place to be buried for Muslims, especially in Iraq. It's huge.
Wow. The funniest, you have a funniest cemetery? You actually found one that's actually funny?
I do, yeah. It was just such a weird thing. Apparently there's an area that just thought, you know, let's have a bit of fun, let's make our cemetery just a little bit more interesting than everyone else's. And so all of their tombstones are just carved out of this wooden, you know, tombstones, and they're painted, this is something to Google, just painted this gorgeous, like, blue color with little, almost like comics on them, and it'll be, like, how people died, like, people who were, you know, kicked by a horse, and so on their tombstone, their carved tombstone, will be a little cartoon person being kicked by a horse and everything like that. And so,
like the Haunted Mansion in Disney.
Yeah, exactly. And so, yeah, it's just a kind of ridiculous way of remembering people in this really kind of colorful cemetery. And then the descriptions that, like, there's one description of a man. Normally they're about, like, from the person's point of view, but this one was written from the perspective of the son-in-law of the woman buried, and it says, you know, if she had lived another day, it would be me in this grave, not her, because just her talking and yelling would have killed me, sort of thing. And so, and they're all like that. They're not in English, but it's like they're all like that. Just these really funny descriptions of how the person died or what they liked. There's one that says, you know, there was never anyone as handsome as me in the world. And so, yeah, it's people just having a little bit of fun. And it's a popular tourist attraction, so people do go and see them and kind of laugh at them.
I was looking, you know, and researching this show, and I happened upon a picture, and it was a clown that died, and all his pallbearers were clowns. And I have to tell you, it was the funniest picture I saw of the day. You know, nothing like looking at 6, you know, not smiling clowns that are supposed to have these smiley faces on them, but they're clearly not smiling, and they're schlepping this coffin around, and they got those big white and red and green shoes on.
Yeah,
I thought that was so
I'm
funny.
terrified of clowns, so that sounds really disturbing. But but I can see it would be funny if you weren't afraid of them. But yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you know, if that's what you do, you know, it's an honorable profession, clowns. But wow, you know, I thought, you know, that just looks really, and that the caption was the saddest clowns on earth. And here they are carrying this coffin, but it just looks so silly, you know. You've got like a ton of lists here. The most bitter cemetery, as in bitter.
Yeah. Yeah, this one was interesting. That was kind of the superlative I gave to Arlington, which we think of now as just kind of like our national cemetery, and it's, you know, really honorable and everything. But really, it started as kind of a middle finger to the South, specifically to Robert E. Lee, because the land that Arlington is on technically is in Virginia, which was the South. And when the war started, Robert E. Lee left to go fight. He owned that bit of land, and his wife fled because she was right there next to Washington, D.C., so of course, you know, you'd flee. And it was taken over by the Union. They went over and took the house and everything. And at one point, the man in charge of figuring out where to bury all of the Union dead said, you know what, we're going to start burying them in Robert E. Lee's front garden. And that's what he did. And so he ended up burying thousands of dead soldiers from the Union side in this area that, you know, technically belonged to the general of the South. And it came to, when the war came to a close, there was a problem because Arlington, you know, based on the treaty, was going to go back to Robert E. Lee and his family. But they had all of these deceased soldiers there. And so it actually went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, you have to give it back to them. And so, you know, the Lees realized that wasn't going to be the best PR if they, like, dug up all these dead Union soldiers. So they ended up selling it, basically, to the North, and they kept burying soldiers there, and that's how we get Arlington today. And it just started because, you know, this one guy was like, I'm going to show Robert E. Lee. If he comes home, his whole house is just going to be covered with dead bodies. And that's what he did.
Yeah, that is an incredible cemetery, and the reason it was created was a civil war, and it's just really, really rough when that kind of thing goes on. You have the smallest tombstones in the world and the largest tombstones in the world.
Yes. Hold on, let me get that. Yeah, it's hard to know on these two, on the smallest and the largest, because it's not really something people seem to be kind of trying to promote or anything, but what, at least from my research, what seems like the smallest in the world is this little tombstone in what's called Oak Hill Cemetery in Missouri, and it's 5 inches by 4 inches by 3 inches, and it's for Lenny Crouch is the name. We know that's her name, and it says her name, Lenny Crouch, and then on the other side, it says her date of death. And when I mean the other side, this is so small that it's actually attached to a pole, basically, and it flips over an iron bar, and it flips over the iron bar. So you can actually see on one side her name and on one side her death date. And so it's incredibly small. And that is in Ripley's Believe It or Not as the smallest tombstone. But there is another contender. It's close. I mean, I haven't seen, Lenny Crouch's tombstone, so I don't know for sure if it's the smallest. But there's another one in Indiana that's 4 inches by 2 inches by 7 inches, and it was apparently a doorstop that was used by the town barber. And when he died, he decided he wanted that to be his tombstone. And so he got his name on it, and it said, Chase the barber, and that's it. So we don't actually know, his date of death or anything like that. But so people apparently, some people want to have tiny tombstones. There's no information as to why. The largest tombstone, this is a little bit more difficult, because you would think if it was the largest, it would still be there. But, we have records that this existed, but it's definitely not still there, or at least people can't find it. But, and this isn't the largest tombstone. It isn't anything that includes, people who had grand mausoleums or a big statue or anything. This is just properly a tombstone. And a guy decided he was going to take a big granite block and just engrave his name and his dates of birth and death. He decided this before he died. And he dug out a tomb underneath this giant granite rock and just had himself placed underneath it and had his death date added. And it was supposed to be, 100 feet tall, 250 feet wide. But if it's still there, we don't know where it is. So it may never have happened. But, yeah. Newspapers covered it, including the New York Times. So.
I was in Sleepy Hollow, and there was this big round boulder, and I started looking around it, and I realized that somebody had cut a third up, 2/3 up on the top, and then I found a plaque that said it was a boulder that was there, and they had it cut, and then they had it cut out so they could put the coffin in there, and then they just put the top of the boulder back on it, and it's somebody's grave.
Nice. That sounds fabulous. I like that, actually.
Yeah, it just looks like a big round rock, standing there, And at first we just thought it was part of the landscape because it's all rocks and hills and everything else there. And then I found this plaque. And I thought that was ingenuity, If let's face it, nobody's going to mess with him, and it's going to be there forever. So I thought it was really pretty cool. That's an awesome cemetery. If people can get up to Sleepy Hollow this summer, which is if you're in New York, it's only like a half-hour ride. To get to. It's an awesome place to go. We're going to go to break, but does your family think you were weird for getting into this this book?
I hope not. I definitely know that my mom is now thinking that the diamond thing, getting made into a diamond that you can, your relatives can then wear, is pretty cool. So I think, if anything, probably opened a few of their eyes to the different options rather than just burial and cremation. So I hope they don't think I'm too crazy or anything.
Yeah, that's when they cremate you and then they crush you into a man-made diamond, right?
Yeah, and then you can wear it just like a regular diamond, and it's supposed to be the carbon that is from your cremated remains, yeah.
Yeah, wow. I'm not sure I'm not sure I want to wear Grandma that way, but, yeah, that's the Diamonds Are Forever chapter in the 4th chapter, The Future of Funerals, and that's what we're going to talk about when we come back, because Back in Victorian days, and that funerals became very elaborate, and even we always had elaborate funerals for leaders and that kind of thing. And Queen Maeve in Ireland, if you go there, there's a big mound on top of a mountain, and they say that Maeve died and she was buried standing up, and that her crypt is under all these stones, and that she wanted to be buried standing up to look at her enemies, because she was the queen of Roscommon. Elaborate funerals, elaborate arrangements have always been there. And then we kind of went into this very clinical, where you just take them to the mortician, get them done, and get them buried, and that's it. But now we're starting to go back to that very elaborate stuff again, where you can be sent into outer space. It's kind of cool that some of the new things that are happening. We'll be right back, and again, our guest is Kathy Benjamin, and she's written a book, Funerals to Die For. You can find it at all the bookstores and on Amazon, and we will be right back.
This is Michelle Tomlinson, the Scream Queen, and I listen to GameCon Radio. Why? Because it rocks.
Welcome back to Mo Banshee's Lair, Visionary Talk Radio, and we are on GCR Internet Radio. Check out our schedule pages. There's a lot of great shows on here. Always rocking music all day long, 24 hours a day. There's music rocking, great shows, different stuff. You're really going to like us once you get used to hearing us. And every week I'm on with another intriguing guest. If I'm interested in it, I hope everybody else is interested in it too. That was Tom Jones in a new release of his, The Tower of Song. And I heard it, and I've been dying to play it. And I thought, oh my goodness, I thought, this is perfect for tonight. It's kind of an end of a swan song type of thing. Our guest tonight, Kathy Benjamin, has written a book that just is a complete list of old, past funeral traditions, worldly traditions, all over the world. Some of them are just so funny. Some of them are so weird. There's a little town in Russia that kind of looks like Hobbitville, right? And all there are in there is dead people.
That is definitely, I can't imagine. Apparently, tourists will get on a bus for like 2 hours to go see this in Russia, and it just, if you see pictures of it, it just looks like the creepiest thing. It looks like you're totally right, little hobbit huts or something, except there's no door. There's only just this tiny little window, and if you look in the window of all of these, all you see are just skeletons from the dead bodies that were in there. And it was there was a big plague, and the population just plummeted, and people started making their own little tiny houses and basically bricking themselves in so that they wouldn't spread the plague. And people would come visit them and put bread through the little window, but they would die anyway, and so that's all you see there now, and it's really creepy looking up in the mountains with all the fog and everything. So yeah, but apparently, if you're in Russia, check it out.
Yeah, the future of funerals, it can be as simple or as grandiose as you want now. There are no rules, really. Once you get past the proper disposal of a body, as long there's there's 2 furnaces now, one in Germany, and I think one is in England now. They're talking about it, where they're taking the dead and using them to heat the town halls and stuff. They're using them actually as fuel to heat, the local civic centers. There's a lot of strange things going, but this all happens when humanity gets to the amount of people we have, and then land gets too dear. It's too hard to find a place to plant them.
Definitely. Yeah, I mean, cremation on a whole, I mean, it was incredibly controversial in the Western world until just about 100 years ago, 120, 130 years ago. But now cremation is incredibly popular, particularly in Europe. And one of the things that cremation is considered much more environmentally friendly than embalming a body and putting it into the ground. So a lot of people are attracted to it for that reason. But the one way that it isn't environmentally friendly is that when you have to, the fire to burn a body has to be so incredibly hot, which means that the smoke that comes out of it is so incredibly hot, and that's actually quite bad for the surrounding area, for animals in the surrounding area. Obviously, birds can't, be anywhere around there because it would burn everything and be terrible. And so one of the things that, as you said, I believe it's Switzerland, Germany, Sweden, and England are trying to do is to take that really, really hot air from crematories and exactly put it to use in some way. And in England, supposedly, they're attempting to warm a local pool with it and things like that. In Sweden, they're trying to warm local houses with it. And, it's not like there's going to be little bits of dead people coming into your house. It's just the heat from it. But you have to do something with it. Otherwise, it is affecting the environment in a much lesser way than other ways of disposing of bodies. But, people this day and age are very concerned about being green. And so you may as well do something with it.
Yeah, there's an old movie with Christopher Lee in it, Mark Harmon, called Goliath Awaits, and it's on the idea of Titanic, only it's a great ship called Goliath in World War I or II, just before World War II, and it's sunk and it lands on like an underground fissure, and it equalizes the pressure in the ship, and they're able to survive. And of course now it's like 50 years later that somebody realizes there's people still alive on it, and they've been surviving there, but the ship is starting to fall apart. And the way they've been heating it is when people die of a mysterious death that just seems to happen. If somebody gets hurt and can't work anymore, they immediately succumb to this death, and then they take their bodies and they use them in the furnace. And it seems like, once a day somebody's dying that can't work anymore. A girl fell and broke her leg, and then that night, even though all it is a broken leg, she dies. But that was a premise in that book and that movie back in the 70s, and it's interesting to see them recycling that kind of idea around. There's also scientists working on chemical baths that will break down bodies so that there's nothing left, and that's another way they're trying to figure out to dispose of them without affecting the ecology around the world. The social death meets actual death. What was that about?
Yeah, that was kind of joke or whatever. But it's definitely people these days are having relationships online, not necessarily romantic relationships, but just relationships with people online, either through just meeting them through Facebook or through different forums or, MMORPGs. And that's what I talk about in my book, is games like World of Warcraft, where, you'll have, I don't game, so I apologize if I say any of this incorrectly, but, there will be like guilds that go on, treks and things, and they're on quests, and they attempt to complete these quests together. And even though they may never have met in real life, they can, they can talk to each other and, communicate online in a variety of different ways, and they become really close. So there have been incidents where someone has died who's a part of, say, one of these World of Warcraft guilds, and they, the other people who feel like they know them, even though they've never met them in real life, they might live halfway around the world, there's no way they could fly to an actual funeral. They want to celebrate the person's life and honor them in death, and one of the ways that they feel is appropriate to do that is online. And so there have been incidents in games like World of Warcraft where people get together and they have basically an online funeral, and it's like their characters, and they talk about the person who's died and everything. And but one of the problems is in games like this, you do have people who compete against you and who aren't necessarily going to care that you're trying to have a solemn occasion. If you're all together and they want to attack you, they might do it. So it's a whole new kind of world of thinking about funerals and thinking about the internet and how our lives are put on that and everything, and how our death is going to be put on it as well. And so it was really interesting to research about how people are doing it. Yeah.
Mhm. Where do you see? Like I said, it can go as far as somebody wants. What are the more unique things you're seeing come out?
Oh man, I mean, I've talked about the diamond thing. About
oh man, wait a minute. Let me take a deep breath.
Okay.
No, I'm laughing. That's the way you said that. Oh man, wait a minute.
Yeah, there's definitely things that people are trying to think about now that they've probably never thought about in the past. One of them being, as you mentioned, environmental things, like the ways you impact people. These days, a lot of people are starting to think, in the past, it was kind of like, I'm going to leave my impression on the world. People are going to know I was here. And now, today, it's almost like, let me leave the least impression possible. I don't want anyone to know I was here. I want it to be completely environmentally safe and wonderful. And our most common way, at least in America, of burying people and putting them into the ground embalmed is incredibly dangerous environmentally. And so and cremation is better, but not hugely better. And so people are starting to come up with ways that are even more environmentally friendly than that. There's something called promession, which is like, I believe that's how it's pronounced, I'm not 100%, which is where you are literally dipped in liquid nitrogen and you are shook. And if anyone knows what liquid nitrogen does, it completely freezes you. And so you are just shook into tiny, tiny little bits. And so it really does hardly any bad things to the environment at all. There's another thing called recimation, which is even greener than that, where you're put into this combination of water and lye. And so you're not frozen, you're basically dissolved into this goo, which sounds pretty gross, but if you're concerned about being environmentally friendly, it's incredibly environmentally friendly. So there's a lot of things that you can do if you want to be a little bit different. You can go out with a bang. As I say in my book, there are companies that will take cremated remains and put them into bullets. And so if you were a big hunter, like my cousins are, you can be put into bullets and then have a friend go out and have fun and shoot some deer, and you can be a part of that from the afterlife. You can have your cremated remains mixed into paint and become a part of an artwork. These days there are just dozens of things that you could never do before that you can do now with your remains, and hopefully something that means something to you.
Yeah, one of the things that I'm seeing that kind of floors me, because I don't see the point. I honest to God don't see the point, is coffins with computers in them.
Yeah, well, that's a little bit, not necessarily misleading, but there are definitely people who are doing that. There's no place that is saying, you know, all of our coffins are going to come with a flat screen. You can, if you wake up underground, you're going to die, but you can at least play, you know, Angry Birds while you're under there or something like that. But I mean, there definitely are people who are combining coffins and technology. And so there are people who are making cases for their PCs that are part of a giant coffin. You flip the lid up, and that's where the screen is, things like that. I mean, there are speakers that are shaped like coffins now. So it's really kind of more for the living, but I think it's definitely, I mean, in the past we've had people who want to do things with their coffin in case they wake up. And these days we have people who will bring their cell phones with them. So I think that probably adding computers to coffins isn't that far off, just, you know, as a just-in-case measure. You can email someone and be like, I woke up, someone dig me up, please.
I see the, you know, you see the coffins and they have the things in them, and I'm like, what a friggin' waste of money. What moron thought of that one? You know, the book looks like it's hysterical, and we didn't even touch, what do you say? We didn't even touch an eighth of the topics in it, right?
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, crashing your own funeral, cadaver synod, love after death. I'm going to assume that's people getting married to corpses, because that one kid in China or something did that. You know, he was engaged. His fiance died, so after she was laid out, he still got married to her. Whoa!
It's actually biggest in France. Surprisingly enough, it's not, you know, it's not one of those things where you say, oh, it's happening in some other weird part of the world. Marrying dead people is probably biggest in France to this day. So yeah, it definitely.
Why am I not surprised? Why am I not surprised by that one? Dead doggy duplication. I'm just rattling off some of the different topics: fat funerals, digital remains. The longest funeral processions, you know, there are so many different topics in this book that just, and then you get into the obituaries. I mean, obituaries are funny. Some people write their own obituaries, and they ream out everybody they ever wanted to call a dirty bastard, because what are they going to do about it, you know?
Exactly.
Death can be fun if you look at it the right way. I mean, it's not fun when you've lost someone you love. But if you sit back and look at all the traditions and all the different little things that people do, you think to yourself, holy crap, there's a whole messed up world out there. And they actually are having fun with their funerals, you know? They actually are enjoying them. I want to thank you so much for coming on. This was just great fun. The book is Funerals to Die For, the craziest, creepiest, and most bizarre funeral traditions and practices ever, by Kathy Benjamin. And you can find it on Amazon. You can find it at Barnes & Nobles, the bookstores. Yep. Yeah, you can find it at the bookstores and order it. It's just a riot. Some of them are going to make you sit there and scratch your head and say, what the heck? But the others are kind of funny, and it's just really the way mankind has learned to deal with death. And it's not a bad thing, I think, for mankind to learn to deal with death, you know? I want to thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me. This is really fun. Thank you very much.
I'm glad you had fun. All you got to do is hang up, and we'll close out the show. And when it's ready, I'll shoot over a message to your email where you can download it. Okay?
Okay, cool. I just wanted to say real quick that to tie back to the beginning, I really hope everyone donates. I know I've donated through text message to the Red Cross for the victims in Oklahoma, so I really hope everyone who listens and enjoyed does that. Okay?
Okay, thank you. Yes,
right, thank
very
you.
important. Thank you. The people in Oklahoma and the animals in Oklahoma are going to need a lot of help. Like I said, people, even if the the owners for animals can be found, it's going to be very hard because the peoples have no place to live. So right now they're scrambling, looking for a place for their children to put their heads down, and the dogs and cats are the last thing they're worrying about, and that's where the Humane Society of Oklahoma comes in, because they're trying to get places for these animals. And God bless the people of Oklahoma. Next week we're going to have Rod DeSailor on, and he's got a book called The Boat, and it's a book about esoteric type of truths of Jesus. So I'm going to have him on, and that should be really interesting. And then we're going to have on June 4th 2 authors on. Erin Rambeau, she's going to be on about her vampire series book, and then Allison Wakely is going to be on about voodoo, women in the Peace Corps. And then on the 11th, we're going to have the great-granddaughter of Molly Brown on, the unsinkable Molly Brown. She's going to come on and talk about her family legacy. And then on the 18th, we're going to have Civil War talk with David Brown, Captain David Brown, a friend of ours, and his grandfather's role in the Civil War, and some artifacts he has. We've got a really cool lineup coming up here, guys, and I'm really over the moon about it. This week is Memorial Day coming, this weekend coming. I hope everybody remembers to thank a vet for serving and paying the last ounce of their life for Memorial Day. It's when we remember soldiers who have given it all. All give some give all. And we have a lot of injured veterans right now, more than we have since Vietnam. And we are still embroiled in a battle in the Mideast, and these young men and women need our support. So please, this Memorial Day, while you're picnicking and doing your thing, please remember these incredible young men and women who are still serving us and making sure that we're safe at night. I just want to remind everybody that you can, the Oklahoma Humane Society is www.okhumane.org, and the number for the Red Cross is, you text 90999, and what they do is they charge your phone $10, and that goes to the Red Cross to help out the people of Oklahoma. I want to thank everybody for listening. I want to thank our guest tonight, Kathy Benjamin. And the way you can thank our guests is by ordering their books. And letting them know that you appreciate them being there. So with that, I'm going to say good night and thank you all for listening. God bless you all. I love you all. Have a good, safe Memorial Day. Watch the drinking. No driving and drinking. Yes, it's Memorial Day and it's a day off and we have picnics, but try to keep a lid on it so everybody you love is safe. And we'll see you next.
Where over the rainbow birds fly. Birds fly over the rainbow. Why, oh,
Thank you for visiting me at my lair. You can always contact me at www.asylumsgate.com. Again, thank you for visiting, and God bless you and yours. And that's when I caught hold of this book. And as I've explained to you, we've had shows about post-mortem photography, which took off after the war, the Civil War, and as photos became, photographers would go through the country and take pictures of little Johnny and Judy dead, so that Mommy and Daddy had a picture to remember them by, and that was actually not considered macabre at all, right?
No, well, I mean, the Victorians, both in England and America, were definitely obsessed with death to a point that, I mean, probably the only time in history that people have been that obsessed with death. And so they had all these kind of macabre ideas, but yeah, according to society at the time, it was perfectly fine. And when it came to things like postmortem photography, to be photographed at that time required a lot of time and a lot of money. I mean, the equivalent of a couple $1,000s today just to have one photo. And you had to sit for long periods of time, long periods being, anywhere up to 15, 20 minutes, depending on the type of exposure they were doing. And so you wouldn't necessarily think it was worth it to spend that much time and money to get a photo of your family until a major person in that family died, and then all of a sudden you might be like, oh my gosh, I wish we had this permanent image of them. And so it became perfectly acceptable. For many people, it would be the only photograph ever taken of them would be when they were dead. And because you had to sit for so long, dead people were actually very, very good at being photographed, because the alive people in the photograph would keep moving, just, shift a little bit. It's almost impossible it's almost impossible to sit still, completely still for 15 minutes. But if you're dead, you're not going to move. So they would end up being, the person in the photo that wasn't all blurry. So it ended up being a really popular way of people to remember their loved ones. And they would display these photos, and they would, have them in lockets around their neck. Again, it's the only photo you have of a loved one, everyone else was doing it. It didn't seem weird to have a dead person in a necklace or anything like that.
Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, Harold, your brother can lay still. Why can't you just stand there?
Exactly.
I mean, I look at some of those old pictures where they have, like, twins holding the hands of the other child, and I'm thinking, well, now we know where Jack the Ripper came from, for crying out loud,
Yeah.
But death was different back then. It's
Toto, I have a feeling we're not in Kansas anymore.
Welcome to Mo Banshee's Lair, Visionary Talk Radio on GCR Progressive Internet Radio. We're rocking your world. Welcome to Mo Banshee's Lair on GCR Internet Radio. We're rocking your world. Tonight we have a really cool guest, Kathy Benjamin. She's written a book, Funerals to Die For, which is just hilarious. But we have some important stuff to talk about first, and that is what's gone on in Oklahoma. I played this song, Bridge Over Troubled Water, tonight in memory of the lives lost in Oklahoma during the recent tornadoes. We don't know why these things happen. I mean, it's nature and all, and it's very hard to take this kind of destruction and get your heads around it and all. But faith in God can do wonders, and I am just over the moon, as sick as it sounds, that the death toll has dropped dramatically. At the beginning of this, they were talking about possibly hundreds of people, mostly children, and now it's dropped dramatically. But the important thing is there are ways to help, okay? All the major news channels, MSN, CNN, what's the other one? Fox News. They all have links, and there's this code that you put into your cell phone. If you text 90999, you can donate $10 by your text phone to the Oklahoma Disaster Relief Fund. If you go on the Salvation Army's page, they already have banners up asking people to donate. The American Red Cross has stuff up for you to donate, and the Oklahoma Humane Society is already scrambling to try to collect animals who are displaced, and that's www.ochumane.org. And you have to understand, even if they can find the owners for these animals, the problem is the owners have no place to go right now. So the animals are going to need to be fostered. They're going to need temporary homes until the owners can get themselves into a permanent situation where they can come and I've had Al Savalane in, and I was just with him over the weekend doing a fundraiser, which went really, really well. But he said, we've made death so clinical now that it's almost like the family is completely relieved of everything but just saying, gee, I miss them. And it seems like nowadays they're starting to take that back. They're taking back the this is my family member and I'm going to do what I want to do with them. Do you know what I mean?
I do, and I think the clinicalness of it definitely, at least in Western society, ties back to when we started embalming people, which happened during and after the Civil War, when embalming became big. Because then, I mean, what you're doing with embalming is trying to convince yourself that nothing changes after death. You know, that people look exactly the same, and you have an open coffin, and it's been a week, and you know they look almost alive, and that, you know, there's no purpose to that other than to convince yourself. And I think since then, we've definitely tried to make it really clinical and really prescribed. And I think people may think that, you know, their religion has always had a certain way of burying people, but most religions have, you know, it's evolved over time. And the sort of ways that we bury people, maybe not now, but, you know, 10, 15 years ago, is definitely a product of the time. And, yeah, we can definitely bring that back. You can say, you know, if you want to write out a will and say, I want to be buried in a way that's environmentally acceptable, or I want people to have fun at my funeral, or things like that. I hope that people are starting to kind of think about death in a way that's a little more fun and a little less clinical, definitely.
Yeah, in the chat there, Lady A is talking about green funerals, and Stanley is talking about him wanting a Viking funeral. Well, my father, he knew he was going to die, and he had been given 5 years, and he was in a very somber mood one day, and he said at the table, he says, when I die, he says, Margaret, I want you buried with me when you die. He says, and my husband, he was a bit of a cut up, and he says, oh, Bud, don't worry about that. He says, we're going to put you on a boat, put it out in the middle of the bay, torch it, give you a Viking funeral. And the old man got up and walked away. And I kicked him under the table. He says, he's serious. Yeah. And he says, I didn't know that. Who the hell would talk about something like that at the table? Get their animals and reclaim them. This is a huge monumental task, but we are Americans and we can do this. So please, if instead of going to McDonald's or Wendy's or one of those crap holes this week, instead do a $10 donation to one of the groups helping these victims. I know when we got hit by the hurricane last year, and we still haven't recovered. There are still areas of Lawrence Harbor and Manalocan and all the shore where the houses are just gone. Families have not been allowed back in yet. This is so upsetting to children. This this puts such a strain on families, so consider making a $10 donation to help. You know, that'll be your good cause for the month. So I'm hoping that a lot of viewers hear this and a lot of people will do this. Again, it's the Salvation Army. I've got to tell you, they are wonderful, wonderful people. And the Red Cross and the Oklahoma Humane Society, oklahomahumane.org. Just what you can, $5-10, whatever, something will help. A lot of places are doing drives. These people don't need ripped up rugs or straw hats. They need deodorant, they need underpants, they need essentials, and all these sites have lists of what these people are going to need in the long and short term. So please check those lists and consider dropping those off. And be careful of scam artists. This kind of thing always brings out scam artists. They say they're collecting for these victims, and it turns out they're not. So be careful. Make sure you double check. I always say go right to the Salvation Army site, go right to the Red Cross site, or go right to the Oklahoma Humane Society site, oklahomahumane.org. And please, I know God will shine on you. Our prayers go out to the people of Oklahoma. This is like the fourth time this town has been leveled. They live in Tornado Alley, and this is one of the big problems with that area. Housing is cheaper, so families think, well, we can make a start there, but there's always a catch. I live by the water, and some of the bungalows by the water, yeah, they are cheaper, but then every 30 or 40 years you get a hurricane that takes out the bungalow. So you see, you know, wherever you're living, you have to be mindful of Mother Nature and what she can do. So God bless everybody in Oklahoma. Everybody do me a favor and make sure you, if you can help, you do. Our guest is waiting on the side, and as I said, I played Bridge Over Troubled Water tonight for the people of Oklahoma. Kathy Benjamin, welcome to the lair.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Thank you. Normally I do a lot of crazy but news, but tonight I think we just need to laugh a little bit. So you've got a book. This book is hilarious. Some of the stuff, I don't even know how you got it.
There's definitely some weird stuff, but it's all interesting and fun. So,
how did you start? How did you get the idea?
Well, actually, it was an idea that was brought to me by my publisher, Adams Media. They'd come up with the idea themselves, and they were looking for an author. But when they gave me the idea, I just thought it was perfect for me because death and dying was something that has just freaked me out so bad. I think it freaks most people out my whole life. And so I decided kind of when I got to college that in order to try and get over my fear, I was going to learn as much as I could kind of from a historical standpoint about like death and funerals. And so I started taking some classes in it about like funerals in the 1800s and death in the 1500s and things like that. So I had a background in it already, and when I was approached with this idea, I said, you know what, this is perfect for me. It's going to be really interesting. So, yeah.
It's you are a writer, right? You are a journalist or something. Yeah. Explain what you usually focus on.
I'm definitely not a journalist, but I am a writer online, and I write for sites like crack.com and mentalfloss.com, and if any of your listeners are familiar with them or not familiar with them, they're websites that run like fact-based articles, but they're also humorous, and they kind of want to introduce people to new facts or have them look at things in a way that they've never thought about them before. So that's been my career for about 4 years now, kind of just presenting, you know, on a weekly basis, interesting new factual things to readers online. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I read it about you on Huffington Post, which is an AOL typey thing, right?
Yeah, I was on there a couple weeks ago talking about the book, yes.
Yeah.